Hi, welcome to the Public Works Pipeline. I'm your host, Mike McKeon. I'm a Lower Merion Township Commissioner. I represent Ward 3. I'm also the chair of the Public Works Committee. And with me on today's show, we have a very special show with Board President Dan Bernheim is here to talk about various issues in the township. And then in our second segment, we're going to be back with Dan and also our Public Works Director, Paul McElhenney, as we try to work through some questions in the Public Works mailbag. So, Dan, thank you very much for coming out on the show today. I know you're a very busy man, so thank you.
Mike, my pleasure. As I told you, I think the Public Works program has the #1 rating from LMTV, which means that Behind the Gavel is behind. So my pleasure to be with you.
Well, no, I watch Behind the Gavel as well. I think it's a great show, and I appreciate you coming out and doing this one as well. So can you just tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. Look, I'm a native Philadelphian, so to speak. Grew up in Cheltenham Township and then moved here. So I tell people I went from Reggie Jackson to Kobe Bryant, and been out here in Lower Merion for about 33 plus years. 2 girls, both of whom went to Penn Valley, Welsh Valley, and Harriton. Older one lives in New York. Unfortunately, her husband's a Giants fan, but other than that, he's a good guy. And they have a beautiful little girl. And then my other one, who lives in town with 2 little boys, are about to move out to Lower Merion. So that's exciting for us. And otherwise, practice law here in the city as the managing partner for the Philadelphia office of a Jersey-based firm doing commercial litigation. And I've been on the board for about 10 years, doing this. So there's a quick 20,000-foot summary.
So what drew you to Lower Merion?
So, look, growing up in the area, you always, heard of Lower Merion, and it distinguished itself and for cause. So when we lived in the city and moved out here, a number of the draws, the schools, its close proximity to Center City, and a bunch of the people we knew, and then the community itself as a whole. So, as I said, it's been 33 plus years, out here. So I guess I've become a native of Lower Merion.
And growing up, going to Cheltenham, I imagine you're a Phillies fan?
A diehard, yes. Of course, in the fall, you bleed eagle green and, Phillies, the whole bit. And as you've heard on the board, my weak athletic analogies that I try to bring up every now and then, sure.
So who was your favorite Philly growing up?
Oh, my gosh. So I still am recovering from the famous 1964 Philly collapse. So I guess it's Richie, or now Dick Allen was probably the hero then, showing what a true nerd. I probably even still give you the starting lineup from the 64 Phillies.
And then they blew like a 10-game lead, and the Reds won the division.
Yeah, very good. I think they ended up doing that. And one of the pitchers they kept pitching was Jim Bunning. And his father then was a judge, I think it was down in Kentucky. And I had to appear down there before him, and I told him I had an axe to grind.
Yeah, my dad actually went to the perfect game that Jim Bunning pitched, and he kept the ticket stub from it, and Jim Bunning autographed it for him.
On Father's Day, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct.
That's right, yeah.
All right, so we've talked a little bit about the Phillies. Lower Merion Township, too. Let's get back into Lower Merion a little bit. You're the Commissioner of Ward 1, which basically just sort of goes across the middle of the township. If you can just tell everybody what's in Ward 1.
So Ward 1 is, Penn Valley. It's got a piece of Wynwood, a piece of Gladwin. The little heart of the Gladwin village is there. And you're right, it's, smack, center of the township. I always say we're pretty lucky. Ward 1 probably has the least amount of the hot issues that come trickling up, although it has its share. But being in the midst, it's mostly the residential, other than that little slice in the center of Gladwin for the most part.
And what are some typical public works issues that you deal with as a commissioner?
Well, look, I think all of us deal with issues of infrastructure and roads, and we hear, besides traffic safety issues, we hear about problems with roads, and be it potholes, and taking care of that. Some of the little troubled areas of making sure that they're well maintained. You've got 2 schools that are there with Penn Valley Elementary and Gladwin Elementary, people being concerned as to what's going on there. But we're pretty fortunate. There's no major issue that trickles up from a Ward 1 criteria only more than anybody else.
Yeah, that's great. Now, Bob Duncan worked in the township for more than 40 years. He was the last of the assistant township manager, also a director for building and planning. In a lot of ways, the backbone of the township. Unfortunately, Lower Merion no longer runs on Duncan. Can you explain the transition from Bob Duncan to Jeff Smith?
Yeah. Look, we were really lucky during the period of time that Bob was here. It was 40 years, and as I tried my best to find the right words, when we said to Bob thanks and wish him the best, that we were losing somebody with just unique skills from his knowledge of municipal governments, how he would communicate it to all of us, to explain it to me like I'm a 6-year-old at times, and Bob was always able to do that. And then we were really very, very fortunate to have Jeff Smith, who had been out in Delaware County and for a period of time, then was down in Sarasota, which they run by counties, not municipalities. So his background and knowledge of municipal governments is also supreme. He was moving back to this area, and so fortunate for his timing to move and our timing for look, we were able to get Jeff here, and he's already hit the ground running, and I think he's impressed all of our colleagues out of the gate.
All right, let's talk about a topic that everyone can agree on, the boathouse. So an alternate location has recently come up in sort of the area of Ward 9, Ward 3 in Ballackinwood behind the Royal Athena. One of the other locations was the Flat Rock Park that people had looked at. Have you had the chance to look at that possible Balla location, and do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so we'll come back to the boathouse in general, and I'll answer your question directly. So in the area that you're talking about, it's a place that is actually owned by Norfolk Southern. And I had the opportunity with Chris Lessling from Building and Planning and Commissioners McComb, Whalen, and Grimes. We walked through the area, and my initial reaction was, we need to find out what we could do, boathouse or no boathouse, how we can get Norfolk Southern to either sell this property to us, or what I've learned they want to do is they want to lease it. For them, it's nothing but a liability and an accident waiting for happen. It's got trails and paths up to the Kinwood Trail, and just would be a great amenity all by itself. We are moving full steam ahead to go ahead and do that. So there's another location there that the people who are looking to find a location for a boathouse, which is primarily for the school rowing team. Absent the school rowing team, we're not having this conversation. That would be another place to have it, as opposed to Flat Rock Park, which has got its issues given the transportation in and out, its location, what it may or may not be disruptive for the neighborhood. But regardless of where, between those two areas that we investigate, the school district needs to step to the plate and state that they are 100% behind whatever it is that needs to be done, because it is primarily for the school team, and that needs to be recognized in order for anything to go forward or even be considered.
And that area behind the Royal Athena, I've done some cleanups back there. I mean, we're literally creating open space because it was just filled with debris and trees and everything, and it's nice to see we lose open space in certain areas. Here's an opportunity to possibly create some open space.
A super amenity for the township. I said, put the boathouse aside. We're going to go ahead and see what we can do with Norfolk Southern so that we can acquire that for people who like, great little hiking trails, great biking trails, and you're right, tons of open space that we can utilize.
Now, I heard they're doing the Speed Humpty dance down on River Road. Is there anything you can tell us about the speed humps?
Yeah, there's a saying, nothing's ever as good as you think it is, nothing's ever as bad as you think it is. So you had all these people, speed humps, speed humps, speed humps, and then we're complaining about the delay in getting them. Now that they're there, saying, I'm not so sure about these speed humps. But they've been finally installed, and candidly, I've heard both, good and bad about it. The idea is to slow the traffic down, and that it will do. So they're in place. I think people who are getting accustomed to them will get accustomed to them, but I think it'll serve the purpose for which they were designed.
Yeah, I drove on it this past weekend, and there's about 5 of them or so right by Flat Rock Park, and then about another 5 or so in the residential area, and I think they're certainly very effective in slowing down the traffic.
Well, if they slowed you down, that proves it works.
Right. Well, I just want to ask you too quickly about the township finances. I mean, during COVID, we really struggled to keep a tight budget and not reduce our services, but we also had to worry about our taxes and other issues. So, how did you go about the process of trying to keep a tight budget?
Well, you're kind to say it. How did I? But I know you're well aware that we really relied upon our staff and giving them some direction from the board, and they were well ahead of the curve here, anticipating what was going to happen. So we anticipated that we may be off about $4 million in revenue, and we were off about 3.8. And then on the other side, on expenses, we had about $2.6 million less because there was less salaries, less overtime that was involved. There were projects that were put off, so we weren't having other contractors, less equipment. So we were able to dial that back, and we planned for it really very well. I give a lot of credit to both our township manager and our CFO, Eric Traub, for having done that. So when we roll around for last year and we were thinking about taxes, the county raised taxes, the school district raised taxes, and that our board, as you're well aware, we did not, with the thought process being, all right, everybody is having a crunch here to the extent that we can give a break, and the fact that we are so financially sound and really anticipated this well, we were able to hold that line. That's not happening indefinitely, no doubt about it, because the big ticket item, or the biggest drawback was business privilege tax, which is predicated on the year before's income. So for 2020, you're looking at 2019. For 2021, you're looking at 2020, and that's where some businesses would have the downside. So it's this upcoming year that we may feel a little bit more of the crunch than before. And at year end, looking at my crystal ball, we may be finding ourselves staring at a tax increase to balance that out.
And speaking of crunch, we're at a time crunch ourselves here, so I think that's all for segment 1. So we'll be back shortly with segment 2. We're going to go through the Public Works mailbag with President Bernheim and Paul McElhaney, so please stick around. Hi, I'm Commissioner Mike McKeon, and I'd like to welcome everyone back to the Public Works Pipeline. We're going to do the Public Works mailbag soon, but before I get into that, I do have some distressing news about the Public Works Pipeline trading card set. We have yet another debacle, and this is almost looking like it's some kind of running joke, which I can assure you it is not. But I had posed for a trading card recently and was given a baseball bat to hold, and unfortunately, someone had scribbled a nasty expression about the Board of Commissioners on the bat knob. So it was discovered after a lot of cards were printed, and we did correct it, and we placed a black mark over the bat. But unfortunately, we produced a lot of cards. We've donated those cards to local food pantries, and we have corrected the error, but it's going to result in another production delay, unfortunately. So, but we're going to hope for the best with the card set. And on cheerier note, we're going to dig into the Public Works mailbag now, and we've got a lot of questions here to ask. First one here comes from a Dean Wormer, and he writes, I live next to a frat house, and bamboo from their property is running onto mine. What do you bumbling nincompoops think I should do about it?
Well,
and I don't look at you as a bumbling nincompoop. That's unfortunately Mr. Wormer's letter.
Right. Well, you have to trust us. And so the issue with bamboo is we passed an ordinance because this stuff can go from one property to the next very, very quickly, and it grows and can just take over a yard. So if somebody has it on their property, they have to be able to remediate it and then put in a barrier so that it's not going to jump to someone else's property. And when that occurs, if they don't correct it, then they can come to the board, and there's actually a bamboo court, so to speak, where we listen to what's occurred there and how to go ahead and remediate it. The idea of the ordinance is really so that neighbors can work with one another, and generally that's what's occurred even when we've had these hearings, to try to work it out with some of the specialists that are around there. But I've learned more about bamboo than I thought I would ever know. And this can be nasty stuff, as it really just grows wild. So I know that folks are trying to take control of it. We also don't want it on our public parks and public properties.
As a follow-up to that, I'd just like to ask our Public Works Director, I mean, is there any kind of pandemonium about the problems of bamboo, including yard waste?
Well, when it comes to yard waste and your remediation, we will not allow bamboo to be dumped with the brush, the normal brush and leaves that residents are allowed to bring in. Bamboo must be disposed of in the same manner as refuse. We do this because we don't want to chance that during our composting process that it's not killed and then we contaminate somebody's property. So residents must dispose of it properly. It has to be disposed of with the regular trash, which at 10 cents a pound.
Yeah, thank you. This next one is from the Ramen Shaman, and he writes, Paul and Dan, how was the transition from board president in 2016, 2017? And for those of you who may not be familiar, I'm fortunate enough here to sit next to a former board president and currently our Public Works Director, Paul McElhenney, and then Paul was succeeded as board president by current president Dan Bernheim. So this was, I take it, a peaceful transition.
It was a hostile takeover by Dan.
The truth is that,
and that's what we're here for, the truth today.
Right. So you can't handle. So the truth is that in the year that Paul first served, prior to that, the board in a friendly split was saying, well, should Paul do it? He had been vice president or Dan. And Paul, I give 110% credit, came to me and said, look, this has been done before. I'll serve a year, you serve a year. And he did that so that on the board there would be harmony and everybody would be on board with that. And again, I give Paul complete credit, for having come up with that. And that's what we did. And then I got the advantage, because Paul had been vice president for how many years, Paul? 6 years. Yeah, of going to school on Paul, who really understood what board officers was about. And then the following year I served as president. And then we were, clever enough to find a position that we could stick Paul in Public Works, when he wasn't looking one night. We voted for it. And it really, it worked out well. And it truly is that gentleman's complete credit.
No, it was mutual. It worked out well for the board. Gave Dan a little bit of time to acclimate to being in leadership. It worked well.
Our next question here is from Joey Nichols. He writes, Commissioner McKeon, I would call your show a train wreck, except that would be an insult to train wrecks. But if it's not too much trouble, would you mind telling me about the 2021 paving schedule? So I guess, Paul, I don't know anything about it, but
well,
you might.
Last week the board awarded the contract to Allen Myers Incorporated. We will be scheduling a pre-con meeting with them shortly. I've spoken to them on 2 occasions so far since last Wednesday. We will be scheduling the pre-con. Normally we look to start our paving schedule the week after school ends. We will need to see where we are in our work, because we do a lot of restorations of sewers and inlets and manholes and all that. And what Allen Myers has on their schedule will coordinate the two. But it'll be sometime after school ends through the summer.
And when does it all get done?
We try to finish before school opens. We'll see. Hopefully this year we will. The biggest concern will be Conshohocken State Road from Spring Mill Road to the Henry Estate or Henry Road, Henry Lane. That's going to take some coordination. As you know, it's a major thoroughfare, and we're paving both lanes all the way from point A to point B. So that'll take some coordination and some scheduling.
Paul, you forgot to mention that all of Ward 1 gets paved first?
Oh, without a doubt, because Ward 1 takes best care of us. So.
And speaking of Ward 1, this next letter is from Mr. Lafayette Hill. Mr. Hill writes, President Bernheim, what is going on with the Gladwin Acme?
Excellent question. So the Acme went dark, it's now a year and a half, 2 years ago, and currently it is under agreement of sale. And there is somebody that's interested in acquiring the property. They have, no surprise, a mixed-use concept where they have met with myself, Commissioner Grimes. They've met with some members of the Gladwin Civic, just for floating some of their ideas, which would include having some type of boutique-ish, grocery, if they're able to obtain that, potentially a restaurant, and then some residential use. that residential use, I am sure, will get an interesting reaction from the community, but there's a lot of work yet to be done. But that's the current status, and there are other developers that have expressed an interest in the property. So we'll see what comes forth.
Next question here is from Kenneth Square, and Kenneth writes, Count McElhenney, how can I get rid of yard waste through the township?
Numerous ways. First, if you purchase the yard waste bags that you can buy at Home Depot, Lowe's, Mapes, even down at our Kegel complex, you can purchase those bags. You can place your yard waste in those bags. No rocks, no grass clippings, or anything of that nature. It has to be branches that do not stick out past the end of the bag, leaves and all that. You place them curbside. We try to do our best to pick them up same day as your trash. Some days we're a day or two behind due to the volume. The other way is you can bring it into our Kegel complex. It doesn't have to be bagged. You can bring it in, you know, if you have a little pickup or on a tarp or whatever, and dispose of it at the Kegel complex.
Oh, thank you. This next one is from Archie Graham, and Archie writes, Dan and Paul, what kind of budget challenges do you foresee in the future? I know we already talked a little bit about budget, but
yeah, well, look, there's you know, an aspect. I'm trying to fit in the line. If you build it, they will come. But yeah, we've got, you know, issues that are, you know, upcoming from, you know, the pandemic, and then also, as you know, there is the American Rescue Act, which
hopefully that will ease our pain.
Hopefully it shall. And we will have about $25 million that will come to us in different tranches, but the Department of Treasury hasn't laid out all of the guidelines for that. But to the extent that we're able to put that into some infrastructure needs that were delayed, I think the board is going to look very, very heavily at that, because we need to be careful and recognize this isn't reoccurring funds. So if we put it into a program, we can't put it into something that needs reoccurring funds that aren't there. So we're looking to see how we can apply that to some of the items that were, you know, placed in coma during the pandemic.
Well, thank you for going the distance on that one. Next question here is for Paul, and this is from Mr. Chad Ford. And Chad writes, can you please explain to me the current public works policies in the township? As it relates to COVID.
I was going to say our policies are long and deep.
Right.
As it relates to COVID, this year's been interesting. We've had staff wearing masks at all times. We alternated schedules. We had separated our fleet so that if someone became sick, we didn't lose our whole fleet division. We did the same with our sewer division, our electric shop. We had the Kegel complex had been closed. We still do. That has reopened to the public. For a while that had been closed. We have gone back to opening that. We have staff doing temperature checks every morning at the buildings. We're still working under the mandate for masks unless they're outside and 6 feet apart. But we go by the guidance of the CDC and the Board of Commissioners and whatever directive when it comes down to us. But it's been very thorough and it's been exhausting at times.
Yeah, and I mean, the board, we really appreciate all the work that Public Works has done on the front line throughout this pandemic. Our last question comes from Mr. Max Mercy, and Max writes, Dan and Paul, how many games will the Philadelphia Eagles win this year? And keep in mind, I think there's a 17-game schedule.
Well, I'll tell you, there'll be two things in reference to that. The Eagles will win 9, but they'll be very upset when Carson Wentz is an MVP candidate. But I'd be remiss sitting on this show if I did not acknowledge what Paul and his crew did through this past 18 months. It has been nothing short of remarkable, because you got to remember, if one guy on a truck is COVID, that affects everybody else. And to juggle all that's gone on, that we have not missed a beat in anything that is under the label of Public Works. So the Eagles emulate that, maybe 10 games.
Yeah, thank you. Well, that about wraps it up for the this episode. You know, and that kind of reminds me, there's an old joke of two elderly women are at a resort in the Catskills, and one says, oh, gosh, the food here is just terrible. And the other one says, yeah, in such small portions. And that's kind of the way the Public Works pipeline works. It's ugly, it's miserable, it's terrible, and it's all over far too quickly. So thanks for watching.